The cross-examination of the first state witness will continue in the Senzo Meyiwa trial. This is in the Pretoria High Court this morning. Sergeant Thabo Mosia, who collected evidence at the scene where Meyiwa was gunned down, will face tough questions around the contents of the affidavit he filed 4 years after the shooting, I should say. Now, our Newzroom Afrika reporter, Linda Mnisi, is outside court and he joins us live now. Linda, good morning to you. Just take us back to the events that occurred yesterday. Much of the conversation centered around a documentary that was aired just 4 days before the start of this trial back in April. The decision of the judge, how is that sitting with the defense lawyers, in particular Advocate Malisela Tefu?
Well, you'll remember, Toli, that they did, in fact, tell the court that they were not quite happy with the presence of 1010 Films here in court, but were willing to accept the judgment that came from Judge Thabo Mosia, saying that because there was no proper application that was made in this particular matter, he couldn't then order 1010 Films to get out of the court. You'll remember they had also been granted permission, the same way that other media houses had been granted, to film proceedings in this particular matter. The defense also arguing the fact that, there are a lot of things that have happened, particularly when you look at the airing of that 5-part documentary just before the start of the trial, saying that it influenced public perception, but also exposed some of the potential witnesses to intimidation as well as threats. Also, the argument around whether or not 1010 Films is a media house. In fact, Advocate Malisela Tefu arguing that they are not regulated, so holding them accountable would be difficult. In fact, answering to the submissions that were made by Advocate Winks that if they had done anything wrong with airing that documentary prior to the start of the trial, then they could have at least reported them to the police. So the judge then making that judgment, saying that because there was no proper application to this particular rescission of the decision to allow 1010 Films to participate in these proceedings, he cannot order them to go out. So at this particular point, it remains, that particular judgment that they will continue filming these proceedings. If the defense as well as the state still want them to go out, they will have to go back to the drawing board, make a proper application with proper affidavits where they actually outline what they have done and the damage, that is caused by airing that documentary, particularly when you look at issues around the hampering of the administration of justice.
Linda, then let's talk about the state's first witness, Sergeant Thabo Mosia. Just as he was instructed, I suppose, or asked, if we could use friendly language, he was asked by Advocate Malisela Tefu to go through his own statement, and I suppose that's where Advocate Tefu is going to pick up from, because as he was about to ask questions, the judge, Thabo Mosia, decided to adjourn the court proceedings for the day.
Yeah, you'll remember that the defense has been pursuing the angle of the tampering of the scene, and this affidavit now is one that was presented by the defense. It seems Sergeant Thabo Mosia made that affidavit just 4 years after Meyiwa's passing, under the impression that in fact he was making it in this case that is faced now by the 5 men who are in the dock. But he says that, Advocate Malisela Tefu says that in fact it was under the case where they were probing a case of defeating the ends of justice. So everything that is contained in that affidavit, Thabo Mosia says that he takes full responsibility for. He even had time to sit with that particular affidavit before handing it back to the police. Right now, Thabo Mosia is on incapacity leave, and at the time when he made this affidavit, he was still within the police service, saying he was fully aware that he was making this affidavit under oath. So we're expecting them today for him to go through the contents of this particular affidavit. It will be interesting to see how the defense tries to poke holes in the statement that he made earlier and keeps on reiterating that he did not suspect that there was any tampering of the scene, because it seems the defense is quite adamant that that happened. And if you look at, the evidence that was brought before the court in his evidence in chief, saying that, he arrived at the scene and found Sergeant Philani Ndlovu, the now late Sergeant Philani Ndlovu, who showed him around in the scene, who showed him the areas that had been cordoned off, where he could take, DNA swabs and, of course, gather evidence. So it'll be interesting to see how the defense goes about trying to poke holes in his statements around whether or not the scene was contaminated.
Mnisi, thank you very much for that comprehensive update. We will keep a close eye on that case as soon as we are able to see the court proceedings begin.